It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you here and now in the sacred ground of Glastonbury. Glastonbury is, and I think will always be, very closely connected with the face and the message of one of its strongest defending angels, and that is the late, great John Michell, who lived from 1933 to 2009. His writings, his research, and his mystical conviction helped to revive the spirit of Avalon, especially in the 60s and 70s. He played a major role in inspiring the first of the Glastonbury festivals, and through his writings, a generation of seekers to investigate the mysteries of ancient places and forgotten knowledge. It was John's work and personality that infused the first of the Megalithomania conferences, which was in fact named after one of his books. He wrote about 24 books and hundreds of pamphlets, articles, columns, and letters. His main vision had to do with sacred geometry and number. Though he treated many subjects, often very, very subversively, number was his guiding light, and he always returned to it. I remember many, many evenings with John Michell and John Neal, who was his lifelong best friend, debating the subtleties of the number canon into the early hours of the morning. In 1980, John Michell wrote a short but dense and very groundbreaking book called Ancient Metrology, The Dimensions of Stonehenge and of the Whole World as therein symbolized. Taking off from this, John Neal went on to mine the whole motherlode of systems of ancient measure. All these systems have a single unifying factor, and that is relationship, significant relationship with the human body, the dimensions of the earth, the moon, the sun, and the heavenly bodies. John Neal is the author of several books, including All Done with Mirrors and The Structure of Metrology. He's now going to give us the second annual John Michell Memorial Talk at Megalithomania, and the title is Michell and Me, How We Cracked Metrology.
What I'm going to talk about is some of the things that John accomplished, particularly his contributions to the study of metrology and my input into his work. I'll attempt to explain why the general study is of great importance. Without knowledge of metrology, beautiful figures of geometry that spring from Islamic tile work, ancient buildings, temples, and human form are simply numerical ratios. It's the application of a measurement scale onto these things that enables one to see the numbers as used by the designers and the architects emerge. This adds another complete dimension to the interpretation that is particularly applicable to archaeology. I met John around 1967 because of my interest in UFOs. He'd recently written a book on the subject, and I was to speak to him about it. By this time, he was busy researching what was to become the volume that kicked this whole movement off, resulting in you sitting there and me sitting here. This was, of course, the view over Atlantis. It ignited a deep and enduring interest in our past, focusing our interest on Glastonbury and Stonehenge. This is the book, of course. And it was during this period, when we was researching this book, that he told me at length about the content of this coming work. But nothing could have prepared me for the impact that that book had. It wasn't just me, but a whole generation of curious people, in many senses of the word, were lucky enough that were lucky enough to have read it at that particular time, at that magical time. It caught the zeitgeist. It was the inspiration of its age. For the first time, people had a concept-shattering glimpse of John's vision of the high culture that existed in prehistoric times and spread over the whole world. The evidence for its existence was scattered across the globe, preserved in the temples, in the monuments, and the megaliths that were carefully cited, and their interrelationships often took the form of alignments that would have to have been methodically surveyed. The source material that had inspired John to achieve his vision was William Sterling's The Canon and Bleibond's Gematria. These works were broadly based on the science of gematria, which is the weaving of geometrical constructs into the written word through the values of the numbers. Because in both Greek and Hebrew, the letters are also the numbers. So each word, phrase, even whole sentences have a numerical value. And the numbers that come out of the scriptures are often of a canonical nature. That is, the repetitive values that occur, 4, 3, 2, 8, 6, 4, 10, 80, 50, 40, etc., can be and were applied to many classes of phenomena in all religions. This is an example of this doesn't come from Bleibond or anything. It's one of John's constructs following the construct of gematria. And it was during, in all religions, Hindu, Greek pantheism, Hebrew, Norse, Celtic, to name some of them, these numbers repeat in their mythologies, in the foundations of their heavenly cities, in their time cycles, the dimensions of the planet and the solar system and the orderly arrangement of the universe. And another theme that John introduced was that of lays. Of course, we all know about this, proposed by Alfred Watkins in the 20s and 30s. His discoveries were written up as the Old Straight Track, and it was largely these books that were the foundation of the view of Atlantis, which John illustrated then with very good examples of his own confirmation of the evidence that he'd assimilated. This is one of them in particular, and this is where he first makes his tentative probings into metrology. I don't know why, but John, he proposed this unit of measurement called a geomancer's mile, and he wanted to produce evidence for it, and it was 2.72 miles. And he suggested to me that I look on particular maps, Dorset and Somerset, and see how many churches were separated by this thing that he termed a geomancer's mile. Anyway, I found about 100 of them did just exactly that. But I also knew that it didn't matter where you set the compass points, you're going to get the same sort of thing coming out, you know. So anyway, he quoted me in View Over Atlantis as being the founder of the geomancer's mile. I mean, he really set me up for this, you know what I mean? He just needed some bloody evidence, and he got me to provide it for him. Anyway, curiously enough, there are 25 of these to the geographic degree, but we won't go into that. Now, this is the mystery. I mean, I'd only just met John. I hadn't known him for very long. And yet he picked me, of all the people he knew, to quote as an authority on the subject, and I knew absolutely nothing. He must have known somehow that I'll end up majoring in that subject, you know. But I think somehow he apprenticed me at that time, from the very beginning. He immediately followed up with the View of Atlantis was a city of revelation, and this is where he began to refine the subject of metrology and to make solidly grounded figures of geometry conform to the canonical numbers expressed in the ancient units, especially as regards the figure of geometry that are concealed within the gematria of the allegorical stories of the Christian scriptures. The story of Peter and the fishes is patent in this respect. This is another lay. John used straight stretches of road, and there's a 12-mile separation, and you've got two villages there, Thetford and Attleborough, with the axis of the two towns being on a straight line. But then when he got into the gematria in the City of Revelation, this is one of the stories. I'll just use it to illustrate. Here you have Peter and the 6 apostles in the boat, and then Peter tells them to cast a net, and they cast a net one side of the boat, and they catch a fish. And then Peter then gets them to cast a net again, and they pull in a net full of 153 fishes. And John has got this divided up into 16 with the big fish, and all the numbers from 1 to 16 added up come to 153. And then Peter leaves the boat and draws the fishes. And there he is outside of the boat then, and he draws the boat and the apostles and the fishes to the shore. I think that was all a bit, you know, I wasn't sure what to make of it. I'm a bit of a skeptic, you know, a massive bullshit meter, and you know, I went along with it anyway. But the thing that did capture my imagination immediately I saw it, was his method of squaring the circle. And this is the foundation of the city of the New Jerusalem. Now, it's here, you see. Oh, God. Here he'd drawn a circle corresponding to the moon and a circle corresponding to the earth. Now, we were sitting in a pub at the time, and he was showing me this, and he was drawing it on the margin of the Evening Standard, and explaining it to me, and how you take the radii of the centre of the two circles, which of course is easily defined from the squares, and then that was then the radius of a circle that was the same perimeter as a square, giving 22/7. And then he gave a start when he was showing me this, and said, "Christ, I wonder if it is." And that's when he spotted that was the 3-4-5 triangle. And I knew immediately that I was looking at something rather miraculous in a way. I was witnessing something really momentous when he noticed that. And that is when he hooked me in firmly. And I've been into it ever since. But that's how he found it. It kind of built up. Of course, the 3-4-5 triangle then becomes the departure point for the construction of this. Then it develops then into the city of New Jerusalem, you know, which we're all familiar with. This is digress a bit here. We spent much of our time, you know, doing the stuff in the pub. And there he is playing with my calculator in the Georgian Pilgrims. This calculator. This was, of course, in the good old days, and this was just prior to his, wrong one. Just prior to him lighting his joint there. And, you know, I'm mentioning this because there's a very nice thing comes out of this. It's this particular room, it's the Georgian Pilgrims, of course, you're all familiar with, and John and me were sitting about there where that couple are. And I was curious about this room anyway in later years. This is a few years ago, you know, about the time when John was rolling a joint there. But I actually measured this room, and it's a 5:3 ratio, a 4:3 ratio. It's 4 long, it's 3 wide. So it's 20 common Greek feet long and 15 common Greek wide. And you often find the ratio in metrology, you often find that the module of measurement that comes directly from the ratio. So this is paces. This is 4 paces. A pace is 5 feet. So this is 4 paces long and 3 paces wide. And this is the 4 and the 3. This is what I mean. Once you put the measurement onto these ratios is when you see another whole dimension coming out of the thing. And this was favoured by Palladio. This was one of the Renaissance architects. This is one of his favourite dimensions. And, you know, you feel comfortable in that room. It's a lovely scale. And that's why, you know, because it's a proper design. Coincidentally, It's also the 1/1,000,000th in its length of the polar radius of the Earth. Well, all I'm saying is that Palladio used this ratio. The architects, the medieval architects, used this particular common Greek foot it's well known in their architecture. And of course, it was used in prehistory, and that's how long these units of measurement maintain their accuracy. And this room is very accurate. It's also 5 times the length of that room is the exact lintel width of the outer lintel width of Stonehenge. And then each of these cross pieces there and then 6 Royal Egyptian feet, so the lintel stones of Stonehenge would fit twice into each of those divisions. Now, I'm not saying that the medieval architect was aware of any of this. This is just simply the fact that these measures go way back into our antiquity and were used commonly. This is carrying on from the Stonehenge construction, how the New Jerusalem diagram fits over this. I'm anxious to show you this because it will be important later on towards the end. This, of course, is how the 7 hills and the 12 moons, the 12 gates, fit around the heavenly city. And this, of course, is a finished product that we're all very, very familiar with, thanks to John. This diagram is probably the most genuine thing that he's really ever come up with. You know, but that's a story about how the New Jerusalem unfolds from a very simple 3, 4, 5 triangle, which is, of course, the building block of the universe. But if John had studied the biographies of Isaac Newton more diligently, he would have recognized a man on an identical mission to himself. Newton recognized that a code had been written into both the Old and the New Testaments, and he took them apart looking to decipher this code. But he was very well motivated to do it because he wanted to construct the Temple of Jerusalem, just exactly the same thing John was doing. And because he knew that in the dimensions of the temple, this is one of Newton's attempts to do this very same thing that John had been doing. This is the Temple of Jerusalem as portrayed by Newton. And he knew that it was the model of the earth, fractal fashion. And also that it was like, also that the model of a man, fractal fashion into the temple, you know, and then into the size of the earth. And he desperately needed to know the size of the earth. But John never studied Newton very much, and I rather think this is because he was such a fan of Blake, and Blake was the visionary, and Blake wasn't very nice about Newton, you know, his mechanistic view of the universe and one thing like that. And what Newton did know, and what John also knew, is that the scriptures were originally written by the Gnostics, and Gnostic means knowledge, and Gnosticism is a syncretism of Pythagoreanism and Platonism, and it deals with these number codes, as we've seen with the gematria. But Newton, he couldn't even take holy orders because he knew that by the end of the sort of 4th century, Gnosticism had been completely crushed, and a perverted form of Christianity had taken over. It was founded on the Episcopalian nature of the church run by bishops and the Trinitarianism that relied on faith. And this happened at the very first Council of Nicaea, when the Bishop Athanasius got the vote over Arius, and Arius was the Bishop of Alexandria and was the last of the Gnostics, really, because he maintained that it was knowledge that we needed, and faith was quite beside the point. But Arius having won, and Newton was an Arian in every sense of the word, but Athanasius won the day at Nicaea, and subsequently the Arian books were burned, and this is the burning of the books. And Arius, of course, was Bishop of Alexandria, so not only did Gnosticism and this whole science die at that time, was destroyed by the Christian Church as heretical. But you know, that was the beginning of the age of darkness and the reign of Satan, as far as Newton was concerned. Yeah. Anyway. John, he would have seen so much in Newton that was similar to his own studies and his own teachings. Well, in the course of the New Jerusalem, he made the City of Revelation. He made certain tentative forays into the field of metrology. He took the Roman Rhone, which is 1.2165 feet, yeah, and he multiplied by the square root 2, which is here, it comes to 172 feet, what you can give it, and so on and so forth, through all the squares. But you see, I mean, it's 298 feet, virtually 1 yard. I mean, this whole thing is absolute bollocks. And yet you still see it quoted, you know, people still quote this thing as being proper, but John never mentioned it again after this, you know. I mean, there's no such thing as near enough when you come to metrology. I mean, measurement is the determination of any magnitude in relation to a fixed magnitude that's regarded as a standard. And there's no such thing as near enough with metrology. Either it's right or it's bloody wrong. And that was wrong, so we never heard any more about this. Anyway, in order to substantiate the claims he'd made in View Over Atlantis and in the City of Revelation, I think he wanted to write a book that dealt with the subjects that was beyond criticism, because he was getting panned at the time. I mean, his arch enemy was, his nemesis was Glyn Daniel, who was the leading archaeologist of our time. And he gave John a really hard time. So John wanted to produce something substantial and prove of the existence of lathes. So he picked West Penwith in Cornwall. And because you've got a very high concentration of megalithic monuments there, so you've got all monuments of a similar nature. So any alignments or things that did arise there, you know, there'd be a very good case to make to prove his point. So off we went. A little band of us. I don't know how he selected us, but there we were. This is Boscawen Circle. So Hugh, if you're going down there, you've got to go to Boscawen. Yeah, that speaks for itself, doesn't it? But then John rather got me at it. John got me at it. He said, you can see the next stone, you know, because we were down there doing the researches on the maps and things. You can see the next stone. If you get on top of one, you can then see the others. So there we go. He got me up there. I mean, he was getting me at it, you know what I mean? But I think I was along as to deter the evil spirits, probably. Yeah. Yeah. With me binoculars, oh God. But yeah. So anyway, the evidence we gathered there at that time. There we are, studying a map there. But the evidence we gathered, he's then submitted to the Royal College, statisticians of the Royal College, and they came up with the answer that the alignments that we'd found from the data points we'd used were quite beyond chance. And John said, so there. You know, he scored a little point there. And this was in 1971. At the end of that year, I moved to West Wales. We no longer had such regular contact, and my own research in history and geometry continued, but at a less frantic rate. And then I moved to America for around 4 years and was absent from John. Without a mutual input, I didn't, you know. But by that time, the pocket calculator arrived. That's how long ago this was. Yeah, really. And this speeded up the data processing no end, I can tell you. By this time, I'd reached the opinion that John was quite wrong in the majority of his claims on the metrological definition of the modules and especially how they applied to the Great Pyramid. But I realised that the truth should be sought along the general lines that he proposed. And all the while my mind stayed focused on the terminal capstone of the pyramid. I knew that was where the solution to the whole problem of metrology and the correct dimensions of the pyramid had to be encapsulated in that pyramidion. I believed that I'd found the answer in the dimension of the tiny seed that John had proposed completed the pyramid scheme. Well, this was like this. This comes straight from View Over Atlantis. And he'd reckoned that by a series of 56s, then the Great Pyramid, it came from a tiny seed on top there, this. And then this was 5 cubic inches of gold, and that would sit on a 5 cubit high pyramid, which was in turn 1/56 part of the whole pyramid. Well, I got living with this thing. I mean, once again, it was all bloody nonsense, the values he was using and everything were totally unsatisfactory, and we both realised it by this time anyway. And, focusing on this tip of the pyramid, I then thought, well, okay, how big is this tiny little seed he's got on top there? So I divided the pyramid using his 480 feet, which is just a nutty approximation. But I divided that by 175,616, which is the 56 cubed. And damn me, it came to about the 365th part of an English foot. So what I did then is tried to work out the size of the pyramid if the English foot actually represented the solar year of 3652422 divisions. It would be almost a 32nd of an inch in our measure, But so I duly did that, and damn it, that would have yielded the Great Pyramid height of 480.82067 feet, which is totally within the parameters of all the estimates that were around. It was quite accurate. And I thought, of course, it was totally accurate. But there was nobody to gainsay you for these things then, because nobody knew anything about metrology. And then, of course, that gave a value for the Royal Egyptian cubit, which I could define as 1.7172166 feet. And this fit perfectly into all the accepted values of the Royal Egyptian cubit, because they vary. We didn't know why they varied, but at that time, we do now, of course. And then I came into much more data, through this wonderful book that John also admired very much. It's Secrets of the Great Pyramid, and it gives you the ideas of many, many more men, But it did nothing to detract me, particularly Stachini, but it did nothing to detract me from my findings of well, not too fast, but I might lift me up a little bit, elevate this somewhat.
If we can lower this a bit as well, so people can see a bit better, is that all right?
Yeah, okay, no, okay. God, it's terrible being a short asking. Yeah. Or maybe we can go right down. No, okay. Yeah, so I was then viewing all linear measure as time periods because of this. It wasn't helped by the fact that if the English foot was 1 year, then it would very accurately give you the Roman foot as the lunar year. And then the Riemann that John was using earlier on, the Riemann then would be 444 days. So I thought I got it. Anyway, after all this sort of stuff, I came back to England, and after an absence for about 4 years or more, and went straight round to see John. And of course, we got straight back into the conversation where we left off 4 years ago. And we've both been working on what's the length of the Royal Egyptian cubit. So that's the first thing he said to me. Well, what do you make the length of the cubit then? I said, well, 1.7172, 166 feet, just like that, you know. He said, oh, how so? I said, well, because the English foot represents the solar year, and at the scale of the pyramid, and rattled it all off to him. And I thought he'd be, like, you know, a bit interested. But he was pretty non-committal, you know. I think he was formulating his own ideas, but he was keeping it close to his chest. But I had to go off and look after my affairs in Wales, and I saw him only intermittently for the next couple of years. And then one day in 1981, he came walking into my farmhouse, like the cat got the cream. Bastard. And he gave me a copy of ancient Metrology. And, well, that was it. That was it. I mean, I just had to chuck out all my years of research because as wrong as I was, at least I've been researching. So I was therefore qualified to recognise the truth when I saw it. And I saw it in this book. He got it. He was absolutely correct. And it's the most succinct book ever written on the subject of metrology. It's the most beautiful distillation of the knowledge, and it's also a beautifully crafted book. It's written in John's inimitable style. It's a very beautiful book, and I've got to read you an excerpt from it here that underlines the importance of it. A tradition which has been credited by many learned men over the centuries is that the ancients encoded their knowledge of the world in the dimensions of their sacred monuments. If that is so, any attempt to elicit that knowledge must be preceded by a study of ancient metrology, for to interpret any set of dimensions, it is of course necessary to establish the lengths of the units of measure in which they were originally framed. That about sums that up. And here were the keys, I've got them now, which decipher the whole subject, because as good as this was, I came to realise it was far from the whole story. However, it was enough for me to ditch the whole line of inquiry that I pursued for years. And what John had done was to exactly define certain modules of measure. And the amazing thing is that this had never been done before. Every book you read will give you a slightly different value for the Roman foot, or a slightly different value for a Greek foot, and et cetera, et cetera. There was nothing to consult. It was a grab free-for-all out there. But in the course of the research, I came to realise that John had been absolutely correct. And the most important, or one of the most important things in there was the fact that he'd shown that they were linked by two distinct fractions. Hang on, let's go back there. And these fractions are 175 to 176. And he proposed that the 175 was the value of what he called the tropical degree. This was way down south. That would be the value of the take, hang on, where are we? The Greek foot. Take that foot of 1.008. He got that from his reading of John Greaves. And a geographic foot is a 360,000th of a degree. And 360,000 of them is 362,880, which is the length of the degree at around 10 degrees. And he calls the other measures northern because they reflect the length of the degree here. 101376 is the length of the foot at the degree where we're standing, actually. This degree, the degree of Stonehenge in southern England, and that's 364,9536 feet. So he'd identified two fractions, and he saw all these other measures were related by these same two fractions. And the other thing he did in this book was to exactly define the polar radius and the mean radius of the Earth, and he also had stated that they were 441 to 440 of the other. So he got this unit fraction link. I knew there was much more left to discover. And John would sometimes say rather wistfully that he wished he knew someone who could run his figures through a computer. Well, it had to be me in the end, I suppose, you know, but yeah. It finally cracked for me right where it started, at the apex of the pyramid. Many people have claimed that the height of the pyramid represented the radius of the Earth as a geodetic model, and John had satisfactorily established the height of the pyramid of 481.0909 feet. Therefore, if the polar and mean radii of the Earth are respectively 440 to 441 of each other, I simply divided this height by 441. And this is what came out of it. Now, it won't be much to you, I'll just quickly explain it. But this then is the radius of a circle, which is 1.090909 feet. That is a Sumerian foot. And then this is 12 over 7 English feet, and is what I came to call in the end the root Royal Egyptian cubit. There are many Royal Egyptian cubit lengths of exactly that length. So then, you know, John had proposed two values of the Royal Egyptian cubit. 1.7181818, which is Petrie's cubit, and then another one, 1.728, which he got from, it is a genuine cubit, and now we've got another value of the Royal Egyptian cubit. So this immediately started me off. I mean, this is where it all cracked, at the top of the pyramid, really. So we got two measures, now we've got three values for the cubit. Where the hell does this stop and start, you know? So I went back to his figures. That's the cubit in the New Jerusalem. That's not relevant to what I'm saying now. So I went back to his figures. I'd noticed that this 1008 was in fact out of line. These are John's lines, yeah? And this, I noticed, was 7 to 8 of this value, which is the Royal Egyptian foot. But this was in this column, you see. So it was in the wrong column. So I simply moved these columns across, these two here, and then I filled in with this, and I filled in with that to make 3 columns. Now we started with 2 columns separated by 176 to 175, and now we've got 3. Okay, where do they stop and start? And it was clinched because noticing then that the Roman foot, the 500-foot stadia of the Roman foot was 481.0909 feet, which is the exact height of the Great Pyramid. So the Great Pyramid, as well as being 280 Royal Egyptian cubits, is now 500 Roman feet. And I found this value of this Roman foot all over the place, you know, from Holland, Germany, and Spain. But you know, I mean, I was firmly on the quest now, and I finally ended up, you know, after much research, I can't tell you, with this. And these are all the different values. Whoops. These are all the different values of a single foot. This is the English foot, and you can see it's one of a series of the Greek feet. These are, in fact, the Greek feet. So I had to invent this terminology. I had to kick out John's tropical and northern as being much too adequate to categorize them all. And it works like this. Each one of these is 175 to 176 across the rows, and the rows are linked vertically. There's 440 to 441. And this really is the basis, this is the core of the structure of metrology. You can find for each value, each module of measurement, they're all subject to these multiplications. So it gets pretty complex, but it is complex, but it's not complicated. It's all very straightforward. It's just a matter of connection by unit fractions. And I, you know, so I knew that there was much more to it than just the lengths of degrees, because although it obviously came into it, but there had to be another reason for this 175 to 176 fraction separation, and the 440 and the 440, and I finally realised it was this. It was in circles that are diameters of 4, and you find this recorded from Sumeria and from Rome. Vitruvius recorded it. If a diameter of 4 foot, you use 3.125 instead of 22/7. So you're using 25/8 instead of 22/7. And the difference between those two pi ratios is, in fact, 175 to 176. So here's an immediate practical reason for the use of this fraction that concerned metrology, because then you've got a clear number. Instead of a fractured number you get from 22/7 if you're using diameters of 4. And then the 440, 441 fraction, if you've got canonical numbers in the perimeter, you have to add the 440th part to the diameter, to the related measurement, or, you know, to the related measurement. I mean, a Royal Egyptian foot is 8 to 7 of an English foot, which is the 440th part less than that. So the mere fact that the Earth differs in its mean radius and its polar radius by this identical fraction means that the Earth distorts by exactly the same ratio that numbers do. That is, if you use the mean radius of the Earth to calculate the degree, then all the numbers that fit that degree in whole numbers will then fit the polar radius in whole numbers. That's a bit of magic. It's too deep to go into at the moment. It's sort of a bit too complicated. So then I then began to expand the database hugely to those few that John had used. And I got this from Stachini, you know. Oh God, that's gone out of line. They've all gone out of line. That's really bloody bad, that. But I wonder how that happened. So I've had a lot of trouble with this package. But the Assyrian is 15 to 16 of the Roman, and it's also 9 to 10 of the Greek. But then the Roman is 24 to 25 of the Greek. But you see that top column slid over. But then I noticed that if you add, like, the Belgic foot, which is known to be 8 to 9 of the Roman, and you add that, then you can see it's also 6 to 5 of the Assyrian. 8 to 9 of the Roman, 6 to... it's scrambled, isn't it? Yeah. But I've got out of line. But it expanded. So I got 12 of the feet doing my researches and arranged them like this. And this is an extension of that sort of arrangement. And they relate in the columns as unit fractions. Well, then John, he kind of started getting interested again, you know, because when I first gave him the tables, he said, oh dear, dear, dear. So I thought I was being forward, proposing 2 values for each measure, and now we have 8 or 10, more perhaps. Oh goodness, I don't know. But when he finally came to use it in his own researches, and he saw that it worked, you know, and they were actually genuine values that were expanded upon his original tables. But when I first showed it to him, like the 175 to 176, I'd actually written it up somewhere. And I showed it to John, and I said the 2 values that Michell had unwittingly identified as 175 to 176. And he nearly had a fit. He said, what do you mean? Unwittingly? Unwittingly? I said, you can't leave that there. You can't say that. I did this unwittingly. I said, I meant to say perceptively, John. Oh, God, that was all right then. You know. Yeah, I did mean unwittingly, actually. But anyway, he then began to take the whole thing up again, you know, when he could see that this structure that I was finding was absolutely real. And what he'd spotted in this table was the frequency of square numbers that occur. You've got things like 63 to 64. 64 is a square. 9 to 10, 9 to square, 15 to 16, 16 to square, 25 to 24, 25 to square, 36 to 35, 36 to the square, and so on, 48 to 49, 49 to square, and so on and so forth. But he then took it up again, and this went on for months after he spotted this frequency of square numbers. And what he actually came up with was another first. I'm sick of the guy. He keeps coming up with these things that absolutely sum it up. Now, he'd started with like 12 of my values. He'd had to change some of them to get them to come into line. This is all square numbers, yeah? It's like a spine that runs down the values, and these are the values of the various modules that he was coming up with, and these then would be the root values. But what he'd identified here was the strictures within which you may term something a foot. This is the least foot, this is the Assyrian foot at 0.9 English feet, and this is the Russian feet, the Russian foot at 7 to 6 of the English foot. So a fathom of that would be 7 English feet, and a fathom of that would be 5.4 feet. So a fathom of all of these would cover the whole range between 5 feet 4 and 7 feet. And this is canonical man. This is all the men in the world will fit into that canon of order. And it's significant that, like the British Merchant Navy, that they would use, or they knew or recorded fathoms of between 5 feet 6 and 7 feet. So wherever they were in the world, and they wanted to go into dock, they'd have to make damn sure, what fathom they were talking about. So the British Merchant Navy actually used this range of measures, that John had identified. I mean, and this is why the English foot is so important. It's nicely in the middle. So whatever you're finding, whether you're finding like 500 feet stadia, 600 feet stadia, in any of those values of the foot, you're going to keep the same numbers, like it's going to be a regular number in English feet. So the English foot is directly related, and it's central to the whole system. And indeed, it turned out to be that the English foot is indeed the foundation measure. But this was perhaps the greatest contribution that he made to metrology, and this shows you the strictures of what you might call a mathematical foot. And this is how it looks visually, you've got all the same numbers there. I've drawn the lines down so you can see it's made visible, the proportions of the feet, and you can see the waves they go through, as they conform to the table that John had designed from simply an expansion of square numbers. And this really did round it up, and it took it about as far as we can go. But just to finish up with, this is how the measures apply to the human form. Now, if you take the New Jerusalem diagram, it's up here, look. Because you've got the square, you've got Da Vinci's square, in which the Vitruvian man is held. That represents the Earth. Therefore, that represents the moon. So I've added this to this diagram, and all these then become regular numbers. And here, this is a pace around. It's 5.1428571. It's the root value of 5 common Greek feet, which is exactly the same measure that was used in the Georgian Pilgrim Bar and in other places. And exactly that value, it's the basis of Eratosthenes' stadium with which he measured the Earth. And that is 100 times that measurement. That is a pace, 5 feet a module. And then these then become, that's a Sumerian cubit, and that's 2 Sumerian feet, And that's 2.5 Sumerian feet, so that's a step in terms of this Sumerian foot. And this is the same Sumerian foot that appears at the top of the Great Pyramid.